The Eastside development, which now has full planning permission, the go-ahead to continue with the next phase. It's a marina, and as well as creating 160,000 square meters of residential accommodation, some 1,300 residential units. So a very large and very significant development, which we've heard the Minister for Economic Development, Sir Joe Bossano, estimate will have a £2.5 billion impact on the Gibraltar economy over the next 10 years. So very big project. And the development or sort of the news, if you like, that the green light has been given for it to proceed after a site visit last week, comes after some discussion about what that site visit was for and what it achieved. We're joined by the ESG's Janet Howitt, who sits on the Development and Planning Commission. Good afternoon, Janet.
Good afternoon.
So the idea was to look at, by placing a boat in the water, to look at where the southernmost part of the breakwater, and a breakwater is just basically like a wall which like protects the marina,
correct. No? Yeah, exactly.
And tell us how that meeting went from your perspective.
It was a private meeting. It was organised by the developer for DPC members. Of course, being in the Caleta, as soon as people were there, it was obvious people were going to hear about it, and hence why GBC was called and why it was even covered in the news, because it wasn't supposed to be a public meeting. And I think, we were shown the boat, and we had a lot of discussion. We were at the north end of the beach at the time, and it was difficult to really assess the impact. Some of us felt for sure. And in the end, we were encouraged to walk the length of the beach and towards the southern end. And it was clear that as you headed south, the impact of that pier, particularly the last section, was really encroaching on the view from the village. So that had been the point of the meeting.
So as you head towards where the Caleta Hotel used to be?
Exactly. So then the whole thing shifted.
You have less of a sense of open water.
So even though the argument by the developers and everybody on the pro side can say, well, look, it's as big as it has to be to protect the width of the reclamation, which is the width of the marina, and therefore has to have that level of protection. But it does, and even though from one angle it really only juts out a bit, as you proceed around the beach, it definitely cuts out quite a lot of the horizon that's water. So, a few of us left feeling that it wasn't over yet, that we really needed more information, because as it stood, we would need to object to it. And then we learned that the majority had voted in for. So that was it. But what we didn't know, and I did ask, when was the announcement going to be made? It was going to be, because I was being called by many people who were very concerned about this this visit. But I wasn't told directly when that announcement was going to be made. It was made through the press. So it didn't sort of follow a normal DPC procedure at all. It was unusual in that the Minister for the Environment actually had called for such a site visit, because this issue had been promised also by their own government to the villagers during election times, and since that wouldn't be allowed if it had such a big impact. We're talking about the site visit, we're talking about what happened on the day, but obviously this is against a much bigger issue, which is something that as a group we've been lobbying for and concerned about for a long time, that we don't have physical meetings anymore. Everything's done remotely. So we are not happy with that.
You'd prefer face-to-face meetings, no?
It limits understanding. It limits the coverage that these projects get.
It's a change that was brought about during COVID.
And we have never gone back. And we're saying let's go for both. We can have streaming and we can have physical. And then it ensures, particularly for large projects, that the detail behind these projects and the concerns from objectors and people get to hear, yes, you can actually attend these meetings in person, and there's more accountability and there's more transparency, and even developers would welcome them being better understood by the community, because what happens at the moment is it appears on the agenda if people get to hear about it, and then it goes dung, dung, dung. But how can, as DPC members, we were sent over 100 attachments of information for the coastal works. 3 weeks we had to digest all of that. Impossible. Some of these documents were 100 pages long. So when we submitted our response, which was concerns about the sand and the appropriation of the sand, the impacts on the marine environment and all of this. So there's a list. I said, look, but we have to reserve our right to comment once we have digested all the documentation, which everybody should expect to be just logical, because how can we proceed to rubber stamp projects such as this that have such a widespread impact without fully assessing all angles of the information?
And that process is driven by town planning?
Yep.
Okay. And let me take you back a step, if you don't mind. You were talking about the vista from the beach, the view as you look out. And I'm remembering that a few years ago, the Environmental Safety Group campaigned with GONS and Heritage Trust to try to protect some of Gibraltar's views, including that of the North Face. But there is no right in law to protect those at the moment.
There isn't, because although it is in the development plan, strategic vistas is in the development plan, but it has never been resourced. So it hasn't been assessed formally or officially. We worked together and produced a paper pressing for this to happen, but this was years ago, never happened. But the views in respect of this project, I feel, is as important as the impacts on the marine environment and the impacts on the beaches, and on the process. I go back to the process. It really is important that we're really going to keep pushing for greater public engagement and greater interaction, and have people employed by the developer. We had this for the North Mole Power Station and LNG terminal, where it was sufficient to alarm the community about. So we pressed, and they delivered. Shell at the time delivered an exhibition with their qualified scientists and engineers to answer questions from the community. And we should have had that from this. And the developer has sort of said along the way that they would do this, but they haven't. And instead we have a controversial outcome, which could have been ameliorated if we'd had greater access by the community about the intentions and about the depth of assessments that have been made. Because at the moment you have too many question marks and too many disgruntled people.
And this, I mean, to be clear, we're talking about a massive project. If you're just joining us, the Eastside Project, which now has full planning permission, that they'll have to satisfy the DPC with a number of other steps in the coming months and years, and we'll talk to Janet a little bit about that. Janet Howitt sits on the DPC and is here with us in the studio. We asked the government for a breakdown of the vote, and they said that 3 members objected. We'll have to wait to see more from the minutes when those are published. But this is a project which is going to create 160,000 square meters of residential accommodation, over 1,300 residential units, including 100 affordable homes, which I imagine will be handed to the government to allocate. So I mean, you're focusing on the environmental aspect, obviously,
and the process.
And the planning process.
The planning process, correct.
So your beef, if I can describe it as such, is primarily with town planning.
Well, we knew from the year 2000,
government more generally about how such projects are processed.
There is since the mid 2000s, there have been 4 separate designs or plans for the East Side. Every party in government has had plans to do what Joe Bossano has described about creating this new town, new whatever. So there is an inevitability about that happening. So what do you hope for in lieu of that happening? Is that best practice is followed, that the most well understood impacts on the environment can be truly mitigated and protected, and have all players closely involved, university, Nautilus, GONS, heritage, people who are specialists in the areas of protecting these areas, and make sure that we step forward. Now, there has been a lot of consultation. We've met a few times now with the project managers, the engineers, and we've put all these concerns forward. But we just think that because of the pressure, the practical pressure and the economic pressure for even the applicants to get this thing moving means that it's gone through the process faster than we think is right. And we know that there have been a list of conditions assigned to the permission, which includes an overview and ongoing assessment of environmental impacts. But what we think should still happen is mitigation of the pier that we believe still has too much of an effect on the villages. But we still have beach impacts, replenishment of sands, areas that are still to be determined. So there's still a lot, naturally, for a project this size, there's too many angles to sort of say, well, you've ticked all these boxes and you can just go ahead. No, there'll be a lot of checkpoints going forward. But yeah, we're not all in support after the site visit that the result was what we all wanted.
Okay, but you're in the minority. You accept that it was a vote, and there were three
Yep.
who voted against, and from what you're saying, you were one of them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We were one of them. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So it's a democratic vote, and I guess you'll try and convince your colleagues who sit on that of your perspective in the months going forward.
Yes, definitely. And of seeking the best environmental outcome also for the area and for the public amenities, that's Eastern Beach, Catalan Bay and the villages, yeah.
All right, Janet Howitt, anything else that you wanted to tell us in particular? You could talk all day about it, I guess.
Well, it is a huge subject, isn't it?
It's massive.
Yeah.
Massive. But you've covered your main points.
I really think that we need to discuss planning on a regular basis on this program and on your viewpoint. We've had one where we talked a lot about these kind of things in general, but we should have a regular slot, because at least that's one way, until we have physical meetings, of informing the people. We used to have the media covering all the meetings, following up, making decisions accountable. We don't have that anymore, and I think that's a real disservice to the community.
I mean, we do follow every meeting.
Not as if you were sitting in the meeting and hearing it firsthand in the way that you would.
Yeah,
And
there's more to see and to talk about if you're there,
of course.
Yeah,
and you can actually
you've got
follow
the
up
camera
with the
on
individuals there.
Yeah.